Rescued is a podcast of conversations with rescuers and those who've been rescued. It's about the lessons we learn about ourselves, the places we go and why, without judgment or shame, to help us have better adventures, manage risk and deal with the unexpected. How many decisions do you reckon you've made today? Now, I'm thinking it's the conscious ones that come to mind. You know, do I wear the red shirt or the blue top? 1 coffee or 6? Believe it or not, the Harvard Business Review states that adults can make around 35,000 decisions each day, and many of those happen automatically and simultaneously. Today, I'm joined by Hugh Ward, co-owner of the Blue Mountains Climbing School, to learn about an easy tool that we can use every day to help us make better decisions, smarter choices, and have better adventures. Can we kick in, Hugh? I just would love people to know a little bit about your background and where you have come from in terms of, you know, your professional outdoors life, and then how your interest in this area started.
Yeah, I grew up in a very outdoorsy family. Bushwalking and canoeing and canyoning was sort of normal. One of the early memories that I have is my Uncle Johnny teaching me to abseil off the front porch in Concord. And abseiling consisted of him lowering me off the porch using a piece of Venetian blind cord.
Oh, gosh.
And after many, many attempts of this piece of cord rubbing over a sharp edge of a brick, he said, I think it's time to give this away. And I said, one more. And inevitably the Venetian blind cord broke and I crumped in on the driveway and did a bit of sulking. So
Yeah.
I had a very early, introduction to outdoorsy stuff and to risk. When I became, more independent as a young adult, I kind of really got into climbing, and that led me to climb and travel all over Australia, into New Zealand, and actually up into Alaska as well. When I was in Alaska, I was involved in a big rescue. A climbing party in front of us got into a bit of trouble, and the guy that I was with, James, and I took action basically that saved lives. And I came back to Australia feeling really good about it, and discovered this search and rescue organisation that at the time had the catchy name of the Bushwalking Wilderness Rescue Squad, but has since been updated to BSAR. So BSAR is Bush Search and Rescue, and they're a subunit of the SES, or the State Emergency Service. And basically they're the people that in a crisis, your roof gets blown off, they get called in to assist. And I guess I'm in a specialist subunit, Bush Search and Rescue, as I said. We get tasked into remote and rugged locations, possibly overnight or for a number of days. And the expectation is that we're self-sufficient.
Cool. So let's just dial back to when you were in Alaska with James on that incident. What kind of things afterwards did you learn, or lessons did you learn from being involved in that?
I think we were both in our early to mid-20s, and we were both at an altitude that we'd not acclimatised properly to. And I think if I were back there now in a similar circumstance, I would have probably a number of days to rest and recover after that big output of energy. But at the time, it seemed like the following day off was more than enough. And that decision to actually go for the summit the following day led to some more strife for us as well. James became quite altitude sick, and we needed to descend, and basically it ended our trip. So I think some good lessons about maybe being a little bit more considered in our decision making when you came out of that trip.
And then you said you came back and you joined the what's now called Bush Search and Rescue. And what kind of incidents or what kind of situations do you get called to for that?
It could be a lot of different things. Often we're called into searches that have been run for a little while. So somebody's gone missing in a bushy location, and the search area is becoming more and more complex and the terrain harder and harder to manage, and that's when we'll be called in. And frequently those actually don't have an outcome. We might be wandering around in the bush for a couple of weeks before the search gets called off. Another sort of tasking that we frequently get is around the bottom of cliffs, and I guess I'll just let the listeners fill in the sorts of jobs that can come from that. And very occasionally we actually get to be involved in a rescue where we go looking for a missing bushwalker and we find them and we help them to get out.
Yeah.
When that happens, it's pretty excellent.
Yeah, I can imagine. And just for transparency here with everyone, so I'm also a member of the SES Bush Search and Rescue, and I have worked with Hugh quite a lot in the past, and I consider Hugh a good friend. So apart from joining the volunteer organisation, now you mentioned that you've been climbing a lot through your 20s, and obviously since, your uncle was throwing you over a balcony on a Venetian blind cord, and you got into climbing in a big way. How has that changed and progressed through your life, and where has that sort of led you to be professionally where you are today?
It's a good question. It has changed a lot over the years, I guess, and it's always been a staple in my life. And I was a little bit nervous actually moving into it professionally, because it's always been such an important escape from the day-to-day drudgery of work life or the stressful parts of life. It's really difficult to think about or focus on those things when you're out hanging off a cliff. And I guess probably by about 2014, I'd moved full-time into guiding. And, that was a little bit of a lead in doing the courses and working kind of part-time in the space before being able to kind of take it on really full-time. So I hold a handful of Australian qualifications at Cert 4 and diploma level in outdoor leadership, as it's now called, with some specialty roping units, as well as an American qualification, the American Mountain Guides Association rock guiding qual, which I've completed recently and was certainly a very significant investment of time and effort. So the day job for me now looks like I could be guiding people in canyons or on abseils or out on rock climbs. It could be super easy single pitch stuff, or it could be multi-day expeditions in remote places like the Warrumbungles, which is probably 5 hours drive from where we live, for people that aren't familiar with New South Wales. I could also be teaching guides, so I'm really fortunate to be able to work with the next generation of people coming through to be guides.
Looking back over your career and your journey in the outdoors, that's led you to where you are today, how do you feel that your understanding of decision-making and decision-making points, and I think it's also probably a good time to start talking about risk, has developed and changed along the way? How's that been for you?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's developed significantly from just going out and doing the thing and, obviously doing my best to come home safely and in one piece, but without necessarily always understanding what levers that I was pulling to do that. And certainly being in the professional space has given me exposure to a lot more of those kind of decision-making tools. And I work frequently with a guy called Killian Kennedy, and he's a full IFMGA guide. That's an International Federation of Mountain Guides Association, which is kind of as high as you can get in the guiding world, really. And he introduced me, I guess, to this concept of heuristics. And how is that spelled? Because it's a word that I had only started to hear about in the last few months. And I'm wondering if it actually just relates to something that we're all familiar with, but we didn't know there was a term. It's not necessarily a word that we come across a lot. My understanding is it's got origins in Greek, and it's actually kind of tied to the word eureka. So it's to find. I guess heuristics are basically a set of mental shortcuts that we have. Decision-making is tiring, as we all know. When you've been making decisions all day, they kind of get worse and worse, and it's harder and harder to make them. And I guess it's a bit of a hack that our brains come up with to try and make decisions quickly and efficiently in day-to-day situations. So I guess an example of that might be if I go shopping tomorrow and I'm going to spice some food for a trip on the weekend, I'm probably just going to buy the brand of freeze dry that I know. So I don't have to do a major research project into all of the different things out there and what's the nutritional value of them and do they taste okay. And, that's just going to be the work of half a day and it's going to leave me wrung out. I'm just going to go and grab the same thing off the shelf as I've got for the last half a dozen times. And so there's a lot of benefits to the heuristics, but where they can get us into a little bit of trouble is when the importance of accuracy over efficiency has a high consequence. So if we start making a decision that we need to be really, really good and really correct because the consequences of us getting it wrong are high, the efficiency of the heuristics can let us down.
So we're talking about decisions here that we make associated with risk in the adventures or the activities that we undertake in the outdoors. Is that correct?
It is, and it's one of the reasons why the outdoor space is so appealing to many of us, I think. It's one of the few places left where we kind of get complete autonomy over the decisions we make, and we're able to get often quite direct feedback on whether we're making good or bad choices out there. If we don't eat enough or if we're cold and wet and hungry at the end of the night, it's kind of on us. And there's not really that safety net there to catch us as there are in most other areas in society. And I guess it's part of the appeal. It's also one of the reasons why having some tools to understand that risk and to manage it well are important.
Do you want to just give us a quick rundown on your thoughts on risk? Because it's such a huge topic and it's really what brings, this whole podcast series to being here is about risk and how we deal with it in our outdoors life. I'd love to hear your thoughts about risk.
I'm a big believer that everybody should be able to pick a risk tolerance that's right for them. And if they choose to engage more or less closely with whatever the risky thing that they're doing is, that really should be their choice. Where I reckon it's important that we have great conversations like this podcast are helping people to understand what the risk they're engaging with is. Because there's tremendous benefit from engaging, in sort of activities that have some risk or some consequence. I think, particularly for young people, if they don't get any opportunity to sort of do things that have some inherent risk and manage that risk in a way that is effective or ineffective and learn those lessons, they turn into adults that then get cut loose to make decisions that haven't really had a foundation to make good ones yet. And so I think, in terms of our development, it's important to be exposed to those things. I think there's something deep inside us that probably just needs some interaction with decisions and activities that hold more consequence rather than less in order for us to feel properly sort of fulfilled.
So Hugh, why don't we jump into these heuristic tools or thoughts, processes, and maybe some of these models that you've mentioned, and so we can start to break them down and see how we could use them in our own lives, or maybe how we have been using them without realizing it.
So I guess, we talked about heuristics and I guess talked about how they're mental shortcuts and why we kind of have those. So our brain can run on, I guess, autopilot for the bulk of the time, and we're not absolutely exhausted by sort of decision fatigue. But they are, like any time, a car's on cruise control, it's not completely operating itself and it's a bit prone to error. And there's times where we need to be really conscious that actually we need to take control back and start operating again. And I guess one of the things that I love about having some sort of model to identify the shortfalls in that heuristic is that it allows us to take on and own those decisions and make good decisions. So I guess the first guy to sort of really bring these into an outdoorsy sense was this fella called Ian Mcammon. And he was an avalanche forecaster who was seeing a lot of people who had the the experience and the knowledge to go out and make good choices, suffering really bad results.
Right.
I guess particularly getting cleaned up in avalanches. And, not people who were going out to take really risky choices that day, but were somehow ending up with a bad outcome. And about that time in the early noughties, the work of these two fellows, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tsversky, that had been done in the 70s, basically into heuristics and the pitfalls of them. Kahneman actually got a Nobel Prize in economics, and I guess it was all happening at about the same time. And Mcammon sort of made this link of, hang on, that's exactly what's happening for us out in the outdoors. And to try and translate it into a way that we could remember it easily and I guess maybe use to make decisions in groups and to kind of pressure check our decisions a little bit, he put them into an acronym, which is F.A.C.E.T.S. F.A.C.E.T.S didn't really ring true for me because I'm not so much a snow guy. I enjoy mountaineering, but I'm not a frothing skier. It's also an acronym that I guess people who are listening internationally in places with snow slopes that are steep enough to avalanche would probably be a lot more familiar with. Because we have less of that terrain in Australia, it's not something that's in the common parlance. And I guess after a long road trip and listening to a couple of excellent podcasts about decision-making in the outdoors recently, Bridie, my wife, and I were chatting about, wouldn't it be great if this could be kind of shuffled in a way that the acronym could work a little bit more for us in Australia. And I guess we came up with the idea that access could be a good way to think of it. And I particularly like it because it sort of says what it does on the packet. These are tools to help us get it out into the outdoors and do the fun thing rather than preventing us from doing it.
And come back again with a smile on our faces.
Exactly, yeah. Come home and be able to wash the gear and pack it again the next weekend and get out.
Just give us a quick rundown on what each of those letters, the F.A.C.E.T.S acronym, actually stands for. So we're kind of getting ourselves in that right headspace.
So F.A.C.E.T stands for familiarity.
Okay, so F for familiarity. And what does that mean? Familiarity with what?
I guess it could be with a certain area, or it could be with a particular rock climb, style of location, or with a particular piece of equipment.
Yeah, or even maybe a season, the weather. I'm familiar, it should just be this.
Yeah, it's summer, it's going to be hot.
Yeah, okay. And then what about, let's move on to A for, what does that stand for in F.A.C.E.T.S?
Acceptance. And I guess this is social acceptance, or the need or the want for us to be accepted by the group that we're in and the people around us. And social media certainly plays a big part in this nowadays.
Okay, that's a big one for sure. And moving on to C, what's that?
It's often described as a couple of different ways, so commitment and consistency. And so I guess the idea that we want to be consistent in our decision making. We've said that we're going to go out and do whatever it is we've said we're going to go out and do, and now we have to do that.
And E?
It's the expert halo. We've met a heap of people in a meetup group, and the admin's out running a trip on the day, and we're just kind of following along, and because they're the admin, they're the most experienced person, and we're just going to do what they say they're going to do.
After E, we hit T. What's that for?
Tracks, or scarcity. And this is sort of where in the original version it lost me a little bit, but the idea that I'm going to be the first person to put tracks down on a slope, it's really important that I ski that slope before anyone else does.
And then what about the final S that makes up the word F.A.C.E.T.S in this acronym? And this was the original acronym, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. And the final S is for social proof. So the idea that somebody else is doing it, so it must be okay.
So that gives us the foundation of where this thinking that you've gone through has started from. And I'll link to, in the show notes, to some of that original work and the names of those two people who are responsible or have been cited as being the first thinkers in this kind of space, in that avalanche space in the US, and also maybe a couple of those podcasts that you've mentioned as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. There's some really, really good resources out there and people that can go into this in far more detail than I can. Some of them can be a little bit avalanche specific and location specific. But if this inspires people to go out and do some more research and kind of understand this better, then that's fantastic. It's really good.
Massive thanks for the support from the team at Paddy Palin, who since 1930 have been leaders in travel and outdoor adventure. In fact, did you know that Paddy himself, a member of the Sydney Bushwalkers Club, was a volunteer in the original search and rescue arm of the Federation of Bushwalking Clubs in New South Wales? Nice one, Paddy.
Okay, so you said that you come up with this word access. Walk us through how this one works.
Yeah, so we've basically just shuffled the order around, taken the T away and moved the F. And I think Ian Mcammon would be pretty fine with the idea that this work has changed. And certainly he has an expectation that it's a usable tool and that however people can put it to use, he's pretty keen with. And the purpose of the acronym is just to help people remember it so they can use it when they're in the field. We've kind of moved that social acceptance or that acceptance up to first. So that's A for acceptance. The C then is for commitment and consistency.
Mm-hmm.
The next C is for comfort, being in your comfort zone. And even though it's got some slightly negative connotations, like maybe even a little bit of complacency can come in here. The E remains the expert halo. Scarcity is still scarcity, but we've taken away the tracks because maybe it's about a first descent in canyoning or a first ascent in rock climbing or about trying to really milk out the last day of a holiday rather than skiing a slope first. And the last S is social proof.
Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about acceptance. How would that maybe look in practice? What could be maybe some examples of where we might see ourselves making a decision that would rely on that acceptance term?
I guess we've all got a desire inside us to be kind of accepted by the group that we're with.
Yeah.
And if we want to stand out from the crowd, it's probably in a good way, not in a bad way. And so we're less likely to challenge the decision of a group because we don't want to be perceived sort of in that bad way.
Yeah.
I guess, the other big thing nowadays is the acceptance on social media. So chasing the selfie on the waterfall or on the wrong side of the barrier or doing the cool flip or whatever it is there.
Acceptance of the group, that could be things like, the whole group's here, or even, and this is where sometimes group size can be an interesting thing to think about in your preparation. Let's say you've only got a small group and, the majority in the group just want to, let's push for this last peak or this last view spot or this last something before the end of the day. And there's someone or the minority who might just be like, actually, no, I'm not great with that. But, I can't be left here alone. I'm just going to have to join in and go with the flow. I don't want to be seen as Debbie Downer.
Another example that I sort of thought of jumps in canyons. And, some of our listeners will probably be very familiar with the Blue Mountains and, there's this big jump in Butterbox and, that classic kind of everyone else is doing it. Everyone's cheering me on and it doesn't feel right for me today. I've been kind of unco and, that draw toward doing the jump anyway because we want to be accepted by the group instead of walking over the extra 10 metres and rigging up the abseil and kind of bypassing it.
Yeah. Do you know, the thing that makes me think with that one is that there's actually a responsibility not only on the individual, but if we are the group, if we are the others, that we don't apply that pressure if someone is clearly not up for it, not into it.
Yeah, it can be a really interesting balancing act, hey, because we want to encourage people to push themselves and to do something they'll feel good about later. But I guess the danger is that we do push them into doing something that they might regret or that they don't really want to do it and that they're kind of doing it because they're being peer pressured into it rather than because it's something that they really want to do in and of themselves. And I think for me, these tools are only as good as how well we can use them. And I guess the question that I try and ask myself when I'm making decisions, here is, am I seeking external validation with this choice? Am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing it am I hamming it up for the crowd? And if it's the second, I guess that's when I needed to start thinking a little bit more about, if that's my motivator, is it still worthwhile? And maybe the answer is yes, but again, if the answer is yes and I do it, then I've just got to own that.
All right, let's move on, shall we, to the C, the first of the C's, which you mentioned was commitment and consistency.
Yeah, they get sort of, there's a little bit of overlap, I guess, in these things. So the consistency is, we say we're going to do something and we don't want to look like we're all over the shop. So it's kind of locked us into this decision-making path, which means for the rest of the day, we're going to have to make decisions consistent with kind of what our aims and objectives are. I've actually got an example of a time pretty recently where I was in a group, and I think that commitment and consistency heuristic was really at play. And fortunately, the group leader, it was a bush search and rescue training activity, but fortunately the group leader made a really good decision. So we had met in Katoomba, which is in the Blue Mountains, and we were doing an after-work fitness test, basically. So we all kind of run around like mad humans with packs on and step over things and under things and roll around. And there was storms forecast. They were supposed to be a little bit further south of us, and they were supposed to come in later. But what was forecast and what happened ended up being two different things. And so the storm was pretty much brewing, really ready to hit us. There's a lot of lightning kind of about on the horizon and clearly coming toward us. And I guess, this thing had been in the calendar for months, probably 6 months. There'd been a bunch of people who'd organised their lives around getting there. Huge amount of work goes into the coordination of these things, renting facilities to do it in, getting gate keys, picking up the necessary equipment. And we're actually halfway through this thing when Ellen, the team leader, said, okay, we're done here. We're going to go. And so despite that was a really, really good decision. And despite the pressure to be consistent with what we'd put in the unit calendar, and despite all of the energy that we'd already committed to it, it was awesome that a good decision got made, and we kind of called it off that evening.
So let's look at the next C. Comfort zone is how you describe that one. What's that about?
Yeah, the comfort zone, or the old expression about familiarity sort of breeding contempt, or a little bit of complacence. And I guess the idea, this can be the locals trap. I've been here, I've done this again and again and again. I do this climb 3 times a week, and I stop looking at it with the eyes of what I'm actually seeing, and somewhere, because I'm so comfortable with it, I just look at it with the eyes of what I expect to see. And it's the classic, I've been here before, but I'm just starting to take things for granted. That's the question that I will ask myself, is what am I taking for granted here? What am I not seeing that I should be? But actually, the last time I did the K to K, which is Kanangra to Katoomba, it's sort of a very popular multi-day walking trip. Before the fairly spectacular and impactful fires from 2019, 2020, there was a pretty well-established footpad, like probably to the point where you'd have called it a track. And I guess in my head, almost a bit of a trail run. So a few years back, like shortly after those fires, Bridie and I went out to do it in a day. But I think generally people would want to allow 2 or maybe 3 days to complete the trip.
Got it.
We had packed equipment to navigate with, and we actually needed it instead of just following tracks. And, if we'd been too kind of comfortable or too complacent there, things that we took, like head torches and spare batteries for the head torches, and the contingency stuff that we packed and actually needed, we might not have. And that could have been a real problem for us.
Good example of that comfort zone, yeah.
I had another example, and I guess, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here, but I took a really bad fall climbing at Frog a number of years ago, and I was on a climb called Short Order, which is a 20. It's got some difficult moves down close to the ground. I'd climbed it before and didn't really remember it being hard. So that there was a bit of she'll be right. And, you know, it had rained heavily the night before I was climbing at this time, super high humidity, wet holds, and definitely in my mind a little bit too much comfort with the idea that it was only a 20 and she'll be right. And maybe a little bit of acceptance going on as well in my head of like, oh, I don't want to be the guy that's standing out to the group in a bad way by backing off on a 20. So I kind of undertook this move with some very thin, I guess, holds, and the hold that I was kind of remembering being pretty good wasn't as good as I thought it was, and I actually came out of the thing and took a really awkward fall and ended up on the ground. I think that that's a really good example of just being a little bit too comfortable, a little bit complacent, a little bit too much she'll be right.
Thank you for putting yourself out there, because, I mean, this is the whole thing. Like, we all make, you know, millions of decisions every day. This is what's great about this conversation, about these tools, is that they're a way of checking in and just making sure we are trying to make the best decision, and we're consciously making those decisions, and aware that we all make mistakes and we all, you know, make decisions that we're not necessarily proud of.
I think it's really important to have a culture of being open about them as well. If we don't share them, and if we don't kind of admit when we haven't made choices that are as good as they could have been, it robs other people the opportunity to learn from them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of easy to be judgmental when these things happen, but, you know, the reality is it doesn't actually help. It doesn't help the person that it's happened to. It doesn't help other people to learn from it, and it doesn't help whoever's being judgmental either. I remember a talk by Dr. Claire Dallett, who I hope she'll forgive me by simplifying her experience down to it being as a risk boffin in the outdoors. And she had this saying, why did it make sense for that person to do, say, think or feel whatever it is that they did, said, thought or felt that means we're now here having the conversation about it? And I guess specifically that was a workplace kind of example, but I like this sort of ACCESS acronym as a tool for that, thinking about why did it make sense to us at the time to do that, but having had the outcome we've had, we can see that it probably wasn't what we wanted and we need to do something differently in future to get a different and better outcome.
Because I think it's so easy, and we've all done that. You know, when we first, say, hear about an incident or we read about something and we go, what were they thinking? Why did they think that was okay? There's not really much grace in that at all. I
mean, it's natural. It's probably, it's probably another mental shortcut for us to actually put a little bit of distance between ourselves and bad events and sort of say they can't apply to us. It makes us more comfortable kind of engaging in spaces that otherwise we might be uncomfortable. But I think it's short-sighted. A pretty good segue, hey, into the expert halo.
Oh.
You know, the idea that experts are just as prone to making these mistakes as other folks.
Yeah, so how might we see the expert halo play out in our lives?
Yeah, I guess I see two different ways that it can kind of happen. And, you know, is the person that we're looking at as an expert actually an expert? Or are they the leader of a meetup group on Facebook and they're the admin, and because they post the most photos, we just assume that they know the most, where, you know, maybe that's not where they see themselves and maybe it's not where we should be positioning them. We, in our head, make them in to be more than they have the skills to be. Or the other thing is maybe they are that expert and they really have a huge amount of skill and experience, but they're just missing something because they're having an off day, which we all do. It's sort of, I guess it is a problem because it means that we sort of give away some of our responsibility and autonomy.
Yeah.
And that maybe we're seeing something that somebody else isn't, but because they're the expert, we either don't feel comfortable to talk up, kind of probably a little bit back on that acceptance thing. Like I don't want to be the guy that questions somebody that's been doing this for 25 years. or has 70,000 followers or whatever it is. But it doesn't mean that I'm not seeing something that they're not on this day. And I guess the question I always try to ask myself is, like, does that make sense to me? Is this a decision I can own as well? And, we were talking before about kind of fostering group dynamics such that we can have conversations pretty openly. And I sort of think this is a great one for maybe trying to learn something from that expert if we're with them and they're making a decision that's maybe different to what you would have made. Just saying, like, hey, I was sort of thinking maybe we'd do this, and like, am I missing something? How come we're doing that instead? And I see that as a real win-win, because it's a good opportunity either to learn something or to maybe shine a light onto something that people weren't seeing before.
I liked a word you used earlier, which was outsourcing. And outsourcing, that responsibility we take for our own actions. And I think especially when people are beginners or they feel like they have low skills, it's easy to just follow the leader and accept that because this person, and I'm even talking about even people who may position themselves as some sort of a group leader or even be an employee of an organisation or a professional guide, that, it's easy for us to go, oh, they're the experts, I'm paying for them. And I think it's so easy for people who are new, who are just so happy to learn and eager to learn and just happy to be there, to be out doing things, to feel that they don't have a right or a voice, or to even switch off that little switch of that little still small voice that might nudge them and say, maybe something's not quite right.
Yeah, there's something scratching away at me here that doesn't sit well. And, it's so important that we do say something in those times, because if we don't, we're sort of giving away our ownership of that decision. And at the end of the day, it's important that we own the decision, because we've got to live the rest of our lives with the outcome of it. And I mean, we do it all the time, and normally the decisions aren't of consequence. A decision of higher consequence, it's really important that I own it, because the outcome is going to be with me for a long time.
And it's amazing, even as you're moving through these and teaching us about these different parts of this ACCESS acronym in helping us make wiser decisions, I'm seeing how so many of them can actually play together all at the same time. So this expert halo one we're talking on right now, it also goes to that, oh, well, hey, I'm new, I don't want to be seen to be, the worrisome person, so I won't say anything, or hey, I've taken time off work.
They're definitely they interlink, and we can get some of these stacked on top of each other. And it's why it's such a cool tool, I guess, to have everyone in a group be familiar with, because it gives you a shorthand for having these conversations of, like, are we making the right choices here? And often my mates and I will tease each other about whatever kind of choice that we're making fitting into one of these or more than one of them. So it's definitely nuanced and complicated, and it's a rabbit hole that if people want to, they could go right into, which would be awesome.
I've got one more question on this expert halo before we step away from it, and you've touched on it earlier, but it comes down to that balance between, as a professional guide, when you're taking someone out of their comfort zone, or you're wanting to apply just the right amount of encouragement to get them to achieve something that is safe, but there's even all the concepts around that word, but you as a guide are wanting your client or your customer to take a step. How do you find that balance between knowing you can push someone to a limit and not too far, because their own personal decision making may be really high on that, on some of these, and they're not comfortable? How do you deal with that as a guide?
It's tricky, and to me, it's actually the rewarding part of the job, is to help people do something that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. And I think it starts, maybe as early as the first phone call or email, just in trying to be really clear of what they want out of the trip. What are their aims and objectives? And, it could be the same for a recreational trip that that I go on as well, because it just helps to be a little bit consistent in trying not to push people in a direction they don't want to go. So if somebody's come out just to have a really fun day and I'm trying to force a whole bunch of technical skill on them, it's not really in line with what they want out of the day. But if they've come out to do a really big abseil and they're nervous on the lip of the abseil, then, you know, that's kind of probably a more appropriate time to offer them some coaching and some insights that hopefully we've picked up together, you know, working through the morning, that'll help them do the next thing later on. And I think being a bit transparent in it as well. You know, sometimes I'll say to people, like, I really want to encourage you to do this, but I also don't want to talk you into doing something you don't want to. You know, are you saying you don't want to do it now because you're nervous, or are you saying, or because there's something bad happening and I'm just not seeing the full picture? You know, maybe acceptance, commitment, or complacency are kind of sitting there in the background of my mind while I'm wearing that expert halo and go.
This is your before and after story. Prepare for an incredible career in nursing. At Southeastern College, experience expert hands-on training. Learn real-world skills in our professional lab and simulated settings. And train for opportunities as a practical nurse, registered nurse, or career advancement with our RN to BSN program. At Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sac.edu to get started.
On to the first of the S's in the access. Just to recap where we're up to, we've done A for acceptance, and that's at social media as well. Acceptance. C for commitment and consistency. The next C for comfort zone, and E for expert halo. And now we're up to
scarcity. If you wanted to text it in block capitals, you could probably just call it FOMO. Yeah, and I reckon, you know, the whole fear of missing out is a great way of describing this. There's a finite resource there, or finite opportunity, and if I don't make the most of it, I won't be able to again. So, you know, maybe it's putting up a first ascent on a rock climb, or being the first person down a canyon, or the first person walking down a spur. You know, I've never been here before and I want to kind of get in before somebody else does and find that pass, or kind of whatever it is really. It could also be that classic, I've got one day's good weather in a really bad week, or I've got one day's adequate weather in a weekend. And I really want to try and make the most of it.
Like, as you're speaking, like, I'm just thinking of all the times that these things have played a part in some of the decisions that I've made. And some of them, like you said, you know, the one you mentioned is, I'm not proud of all these decisions that I've made, but having this awareness of them now is like, and having this tool is really going to help me hopefully be prouder, and a lot of us be prouder of our decisions that we make in the future. So is there anything else you wanted to add on scarcity before we move on over to the last one?
I've got an example. Last summer, I was going to be guiding Canangra Main with a colleague. And for people who don't know it, Canangra Main's a big canyon. There's 20 plus roped obstacles, and it's not something that gets guided a lot. And I guess in and of itself, that makes it a bit scarce. My colleague and I wanted to get out and kind of recce it before we guided it. And we were down to basically the last day that we could before the trip. And the weather had been pretty appalling. So we're out at Canangra with a really cool group of humans, not Killian, but another fellow, Marty Bear, who's another IFMGA guide, and, you know, a group of either guides or ex-guides, and a mate who's from like a professional search and rescue fellow out of Spain. And, you know, the opportunity to get that group of people together on a recce to go and look at something again and to gain all the insights that they might provide, probably not going to happen again. But when we got out and we were standing at the top of the first abseil and looking at the water levels, it was clearly not the right choice. And as it happened, we kind of left and we went and did a different canyon that sort of had a slightly smaller catchment and was more appropriate for the conditions. But there was a really, really strong pull of like, when are we going to be back here with these people? When are we going to have this opportunity again? Maybe we should just do it.
And when you think about the expertise that was in the group, and the skills and the experience in similar style adventures, you'd be hard-pressed to find having a fully capable group like that attempt something like that, yet you made the decision to do something else.
I'm really comfortable with it. It was a good choice, and I'm glad we went and did Kaylang instead that day. Yeah, I think it would have been really easy to have talked ourselves into why it was fine and why it was a good choice to go anyway.
Can you remember the discussions that you had at the top when you were looking down and the looks on people's faces?
Not really. I remember certainly feeling a little bit of pressure to go down to be able to provide a high quality of guided experience when we kind of were back there the following week. And I definitely remember, because we'd all driven out, we'd all gotten up early, so I guess here we are in kind of commitment, and definitely feeling a bit of pressure on the old consistency front of like, we've come out here to do K-Main, and it's the reason why, Jorge's taken time away from his holiday, and people have knocked back work and all the things. I don't really remember the conversations, but I remember hustling pretty quickly out of there once we'd made the choice to go get into the top of the other canyon that we thought might be more appropriate.
Good decision.
Yeah.
It seems to tick all the happy face boxes. So let's talk about that last one in the Access acronym that you've developed here. What's that all about?
So social proof. I guess this is the idea that, is it safe? Well, I'm not really sure. Well, those people are doing it, so it must be. And it's the classic thinking. Somebody's done it before, so it must be okay. Or the car park's full, so they've all, whether or not they've gone to do the same thing, I guess, is a different question.
Yeah.
Certainly I've been kind of drawn in toward a river crossing that we decided not to do in the end down in the Kalmung. There was a lot of water moving through, that classic water being discoloured and stuff floating in it, and kind of trying to talk ourselves into it being a good idea. And there'd been a party in front of us that we couldn't see. So, they must have got through okay. Maybe they've got washed down into the dam, who knows? But it's really that kind of draw of it just being tempting to follow other people. And again, it's kind of that outsourcing of the decision making. It's kind of giving that ownership away. And we've kind of talked about why it's probably not ideal to do.
The other instance that comes to mind about that social proof is when you say online, you might go to one of the, say, All Trails or something like that, and you see all these reviews and you see people saying, oh, yeah, this was really easy, or this was great, oh, this is the best thing, you should do it. And so that in itself is social proof, like, oh, well, all these other people have been doing it and it's been fabulous, so off I go.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, they were all climbing over the fence of the lookout for the shots, and, just because somebody else has done it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right choice. That they could have a different depth of experience and skill to us to draw on to be able to do these things safely. They could have different conditions when they're there. They could be editing photos better than we do to make them look different. Or they could just be making really bad choices and getting lucky, because that definitely happens, probably to all of us. We've probably all made choices that, thinking back on, we've kind of figured maybe we shouldn't have, but we've been lucky in the outcome. And just because somebody else is doing it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right choice for us. But it's very easy to convince ourselves it is.
What do you think? I mean, all of this adds up to make a great tool to help us make decisions and good decisions. What do you think people need? Like, what do we need to make decisions before we take an action?
I mean, to me, it's almost like there's two parts of our mind. There's the fast part, the bit that's on autopilot, just making these choices for us. And we almost need to stop that bit, slow things down enough to make a conscious choice, and let the slow part of our brain make a considered choice. And, that could just be as simple as, I'm just going to stop here for a second and think about this. Or maybe it's, hey, let's stop the group and talk about it. Or it could be a case of, that looks pretty full on, I'm going to stop and light the jet boil and have a cuppa, and we're just going to have an early lunch, and then we're going to navigate whatever the thing is that we need to navigate next.
So I love that. So being aware that we've got the autopilot fast brain and then being able to just bank that for a second and draw upon this slower, more measured, well thought out part of our brains and refer to tools like this ACCESS acronym that you've worked on.
You know, and I think another thing that's really valuable is having conversations up front with the group about what is it that we're going out to achieve and why, and just making sure that we're all on the same page. You know, ideally before the trip happens, but if not, then on it. You know, if we're on a climbing trip and somebody's on a live free or die, summit or plummet agenda, we have to get to the top no matter what. Like, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's worth it to them, and maybe it's worth it to everyone in the group. But I think it's important that we kind of know that that's what we're signing on for, because the other person in the group, you know, if they're in completely other end of the spectrum, I'm just going to go out to climb in the sun. And I think having those expectations and the motivations talked about up front, both being honest with ourselves and also with the other people in our team, I think that's a really valuable tool to kind of, I guess, lay this over the top of, to make sure that we're then sort of making the decisions that we wanted to at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, oh, so good, so good. And I'm thinking about even in that whole managing expectations, not only managing your own expectations, being aware of them, but managing expectations of the group, being aware of everyone's expectations. So there's a part in there I'm thinking it's choose your friends wisely. You know, choose the people that you're going out with wisely, so you are all on the same page. And
maybe the right friends for the right trip as well, because I know some people that really like to suffer. And so if I want to go out on a suffer fest, it's probably better that I message them than it is that I message somebody that I know likes to take lots of photos and kind of look at every kind of leaf and plant and identify the fungi, and, you know, a different trip that's perfect. But if it's a suffer fest I'm after, I probably need to text the other crowd. That comes from a position of knowing your friends and knowing yourself. I'm thinking again about those groups that you may, you know, some of us may not have the benefit of having a lot of friends and folks around us who are into these kind of adventures and these things that we love to do. So you may find yourself in a position where you've got no choice but to try and tap into communities outside your own, and whether that be online communities or through clubs or other organisations. And so having these kind of discussions and knowing up front what you're signing up for, and the kind of, you know, doing a bit of buyer beware and getting your research down, feels like a bit of hard work, but it feels like it could be something that could make a major difference. And I think just not only in terms of the management of risk and decision making, but just in terms of how enjoyable the trip is, you know, making sure everyone's on the same page before heading out. And, you know, if that particular group or if that particular avenue isn't quite the right one, or maybe there's another one that is, or maybe there's another opportunity that'll come up that's a better fit. I'm even thinking of trips, and this is the smallest, simplest thing, but, you know, there might be say a bushwalk planned for a whole day, and it's, you know, you're going to be out till sunset, you know, getting back to the cars at sunset, but somebody hasn't told you that they really need to get back to town or back to the city. They've got a dinner booked or they've got a theatre ticket booked, and so without anyone knowing, this person has really put the pressure on all day for the speed, and like, come on, we've got to keep moving, got to keep going. And you're like, oh, wow, you know, this person's really taking off. And if you'd had that discussion up front in the morning, or hopefully before the morning, and the expectations were laid down, then you'd never sort of be in that position. Yeah, you'd just choose a slightly different route, cut it back by a third, or do whatever. You know, there's probably half a dozen different ways of managing it. I mean, it's interesting, like the more you look at this heuristic study stuff, the more areas of our life it's relevant to, you know, certainly in terms of being sold to, and a lot of the, you know, the way that a lot of advertising works is based off it. And it's actually kind of terrifying the more you go down the kind of path of understanding this stuff, the more you realise people can pull your levers and influence the way you're making choices for you. It's a bit of a dark art, but how can we use the dark arts in our favour? Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm reminded of a trip that I was going off on that it was like a mountaineering trip at altitude, and everyone around me as I was going was sort of saying, stay safe or come back well or be careful, or kind of these inherently sort of risk averse or slightly wishy-washy statements that are difficult to, beyond acknowledging the well-wishing in it and appreciating it, it was sort of difficult to really kind of take them on board and think, oh yeah, that's something I'll take with me on the trip. And this guy that I climbed with a bit, Xander, he didn't say any of that. He said, make good decisions.
So good.
That was in 2009, and I guess it's something that's really lived with me since, that make good decisions and like consciously make decisions rather than allowing the decisions to make themselves through kind of inactivity or indecision. Yeah, I think it's become a bit of a personal motto.
I wonder if you or Xander will be offended if I start taking on that motto myself. Make good decisions. Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. So in closing, is there anything else you wanted to leave us with in terms of making better decisions?
Yeah, I think if we can be upfront with ourselves on what our motivators are, if we can be upfront with the people around us about what we want out of a trip, and if we can be honest with ourselves about what things are influencing us at the time, my hope is that this will kind of give people a framework to make better decisions, and it's a useful tool, and that it's going to help them to actually get out and do the fun thing rather than as something that might prevent them from doing it.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much, Hugh. Now, if people want to know more about this acronym, this tool that you've developed, F.A.C.E.T.S, and dive into it a little deeper, maybe read some more information on it, is there somewhere they can go for that?
There'll be a blog post on the Climbing School website, climbingschool.com.au. And in it, I think we might link back to McCammon's sort of original work and maybe try and get something in about Kahneman and Tsversky's work as well, because I think it's really important to be able to see the depth of this stuff, and also make sure that those people that have done all the heavy lifting before us are acknowledged.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is sort of one of those episodes that don't involve, in the first case, a dramatic incident or an accident, something that's gone wrong, but hopefully is one that will prevent some of that happening to all of us, and I'm including myself in that. So yeah, thank you so much for this.
Thanks very much for having me on, Cara. It's a great podcast, and I'm pretty stoked to be able to be a part of it.
If you've enjoyed this powerful story, or one of the many others from my super generous guests, you can help more people connect and hear these valuable lessons simply by leaving a 5-star review. And why not even click that little bitty share button on your podcast app and help your outdoorsy mates find it too. The Rescued podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Gundungurra people of the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their enduring connection to and care for country. Special thanks to our sponsors, Paddy Palin. This has been a Lots of Fresh Air production.